All right, good morning and welcome to the December 8th 4-H in-service called Seasonal Holidays Around the World. I appreciate you joining me. As I begin to share this information, my hope is that you'll take some of what we've learned today to truly appreciate and celebrate the true meaning of happy holidays during this time of year as we learn more about the many seasonal celebrations that are celebrated both in the United States and around the world. I think we all agree it's truly a celebratory and joyous time for people throughout the world in many different ways, even in these very challenging times. So I appreciate you joining me. Before we begin, I want to be upfront that I'm going to be talking about a number of holidays for which I personally do not have a context or experience. They're with religions or practices that I don't have myself. Everything I've shared is done with an attitude of respect and a sincere desire to communicate and educate people. And if you are part of a cultural celebration or a practice that I talk about, or you have insight that I don't have and I make a mistake, I apologize and encourage you to reach out to me afterwards so that I can correct that and learn, because obviously we're all about learning and continuing to learn. So today, what we're going to do is learn a little bit more about some seasonal celebrations that occur around this time every year. And so that's primarily in November and December. We're going to start by talking about Jewish holiday celebrations, then go into some Hindu holiday celebration. Then we're going to look at the secular celebration of the holidays, or non-religious holiday celebration. We're going to go into some other religions and that we might not be as familiar with and how they celebrate the holidays. And finally, we're going to focus on the traditional celebration that many of us practice, but the religious celebration of Christmas, which a lot of Kentuckians celebrate this time of year. And we're going to learn about other cultures. We're going to learn about other practices. But I think what you'll see at the end of this is we're going to learn that there's more similarities than differences. So let's start by talking a little bit about the Jewish holiday celebration that many of us have heard about, Hanukkah. Now, I have spelled Hanukkah one of the many ways that you will see it in print, but there's actually several different variant spellings of this Jewish holiday. They're all right to a degree, and it just depends on what individuals have grown up with. So Hanukkah is celebrated on the 25th day of the Jewish month of Kislev in the Jewish calendar. Now, because of that, when you translate it to the modern calendar that we use, it means that the date of Hanukkah rotates and changes from year to year. Hanukkah is also called the Festival of Lights, and it commemorates the miracle of when a single night of lamp oil or olive oil lasted for 8 full nights as a group of Jewish people were taking shelter in a temple after rebelling against their oppressors. And so it's a religious ceremony for the Jewish people, and it's one that is tied to a miracle that occurred within their religious context. Each night, a new candle is lit alongside prayers and traditions. And we don't really have the time to go into a ton of details on these, but at the end of this presentation, there's a resource list that provides some of the context, and I'll be happy to share this with anyone. All right. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I was recording. Traditional foods that are eaten during this time of year are latkes, or potato pancakes, and sufganiyot, which are jam-filled donuts. And here you see a picture of a menorah, which is the candelabra or candlestick that's used to hold the Jewish candles. You also see a wooden item called a dreidel. A dreidel is a four-sided top that is used for kids to play a game. And based on the Hebrew symbol that is on each side of the dreidel, you either get or give or pass in terms of gelt, or as most Jewish kids participate in, foil wrapped chocolate coins. So gelt can mean money, but in the practice of Hanukkah, it means these coins that are shared amongst people in this game of chance using the dreidel or the top. Um, Presents are exchanged each night of Hanukkah, and different families have different sort of traditions or approaches to that, in when or what they give, but presents are traditionally exchanged. I think it's important to note, for those people that are familiar with Hanukkah but don't celebrate it, Hanukkah is a relatively minor religious holiday within the Jewish faith. So it does not have the same level of importance as a religious celebration that Christmas does for practicing Christians. It's become highly commercialized because of its nearness to Christmas. But for the Jewish people, it's not necessarily something where there are religious celebrations of obligation or required time away from work or other activities or restrictions. When you meet someone and want to wish, and you know that they celebrate Hanukkah and want to wish them a happy holidays in the context of their celebration, simply saying happy Hanukkah is appropriate. And people of Jewish faith often share the same greeting, but they do so in Hebrew. And I will not try the Hebrew pronunciation of happy Hanukkah, but that is the translation. So Hanukkah is one of the most common non-Christian celebrations that we know about, and hear about during this holiday season. And it's some of the elements that are important to it are candles, or the use of light and fire, um, giving gifts, and feasting or eating special foods. The next holiday celebration that we're going to look at is Diwali. Diwali is another festival of lights that is celebrated by Hindus, Jains, and Sikhs for 5 days between this mid-October and mid-November. So again, it's based on the Hindu religious calendar, and when translated to the current modern calendar that we use, it's a rotating or moving festival. It's celebrated for 5 nights, and celebrants usually focus on the idea that during this celebration, you're talking about the ascendance of light over darkness, good over evil, or knowledge over ignorance. When celebrating this holiday, people do so by cleaning their home, organizing their house and workplace, just making sure that everything is clean, renovated, and decorated. They wear their finest clothing. It's in some ways a prosperity celebration that's tied to the Hindu goddess Lakshmi, or the goddess of luck and prosperity. And so they focus on those elements. And like the other seasonal holidays we're familiar with, again, food, gifts, and sweets are an important part of the celebration. That celebrants of Diwali often display oil lamps called diya, which are placed in the windows of their homes or workplaces. And they will decorate the floors of their home with elaborate pictures made out of colored powders called, and the pictures are called rangoli, Rangoli, rangoli. And this 5 day celebration, and the picture that you have on your screen is an example of one of these elaborate pictures made out of colored powders. Families will get together and have feasts, but a major component of this is mithai, or the exchange and eating of sweets. Um, and so lots of different candies, and they're not the candies that we might think of like the sugar-based candies. They're more what we might term sweetmeats, which are nut or milk-based sweetened items that people will gift and eat together or as part of the holiday. Each day of Diwali, each of the 5 days, has a different meaning and spiritual focus for the celebration. And in the case of this celebration, it is a major religious holiday for people of these faiths, that has both strong religious significance as well as cultural significance. As gifts are exchanged, like I said, people will enjoy the mitai or the sweets along with chai tea. Meals are very elaborate and feast at this time, but they focus very heavily on vegetarian food. India and the surrounding regions of that world have some of the largest concentrations of vegetarians in the world, and many practitioners of Hindu are religious. And a common food that they would incorporate into their meals is paneer, which is a cheese cube that's used in place of meat. It has somewhat of a tofu like texture if you're familiar with either of those. A really popular dessert, which they use and share this time of year, happens to be one of my favorite Indian food desserts, and it's called gulab jamun, which is like a little donut hole made with milk powder, and it's put in a cardamom and rosewater spice syrup. And we have a local Indian place that I like to go and get that as well as meals. Um, Gifts, and as I said, the gifts are the mitai, and you can see it spelled right there, as well as the vegetarian food and desserts. I just want to pause for a second, and again, I can't see the chat box, but are there any questions if anyone wants to unmute or ask any questions of the two celebrations we've talked about so far? All right. So we've talked about Hanukkah and Diwali, and those are two celebrations in non-Christians' faith. They have different levels of importance within the religious celebration for those faiths. But they both focus on things that I think are familiar to us, the use of lights or the celebration of light in what might be the darkest or close to the darkest time of year, the celebration of food and family and friends, and the commemoration of gifts and community. I'm going to talk about two different secular celebrations. And the first one I wanted to discuss is Kwanzaa. Now, Kwanzaa is a secular based holiday, and I'll tell you more about it in just a moment. But it's very heavily tied to the African American or the Black American community. And that is a community that has a strong faith background and faith culture. So while this specific holiday is not tied to specific religious practices, oftentimes for the celebrants, it's considered part of their spirituality of this time of year as well. But Kwanzaa is relatively a new holiday. It was created in 1966 by a professor at a California university after the Watts riots in Los Angeles in 1965. And for those of us that may have been alive in that time period in the 60s, that was an extremely challenging and difficult time for American people that drove a lot of racial tensions. And this holiday was created as a way to help bring African Americans together and celebrate the African part of their heritage in terms of their community and their friends and family. And this occurs after Christmas through January 1st. So it's celebrated December 26th through January 1st and ends with feasting and gifting. The holiday has its roots that are drawn from a variety of African celebrations, which focus on community, support, harvest, and abundance. People celebrate the holiday in ways that are sort of tied to their personal family culture or background, but generally it includes singing, dancing, storytelling, poetry reading, and feasting. Now, there are 7 guiding principles that are talked about on each of the nights or each of the points of discussion as you go through the Kwanzaa holidays. They are unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics or cooperative economy, purpose, creativity, and finally, faith. Those 7 guiding principles help structure the celebration of Kwanzaa for participants. There are 7 core symbols that are talked about in terms of Kwanzaa and as they celebrate, and those include crops. That's sort of the tie-in to the harvest elements from African cultural traditions. There's a placemat that is used to symbolize the foundation on which people build their lives. When you have a meal, the placemat is the foundation on which you build your meal. And in this case, the placemat is the foundation on how people who celebrate Kwanzaa build their lives. Ears of corn, again, a tie into the harvest. Candles, light, the candle holder, that which holds or nurtures the light. The unity cup, the cup that we all drink from and share a common culture, background, faith, and celebration. And finally, gifts. Those are the 7 core symbols that are talked about in Kwanzaa. Now, Kwanzaa, each day of Kwanzaa is dedicated to one of the specific principles, and they represent the values of African culture. And they are values that were selected because the original creator of this holiday felt that those help represent, build, and build community for African Americans. Um, Now, like many of the holidays we've talked about so far, Kwanzaa has a lot of feasting, but what's unique about Kwanzaa is that there are no traditional foods. There are no special dishes that are tied to the holiday in general. However, the as it is celebrated by usually Black Americans or African Americans, they bring their own cultural background to the celebration and include culturally significant foods to them that represent their heritage, culture, and traditions. And that's based on the family, the individual family, or the community in which you live. So you might go to Kwanzaa celebrations around the United States, and a lot of them you'd see traditional Southern soul food, such as collard greens or mac and cheese. But in others, you might see Ghanaian groundnut stew or other types of Ghanaian dishes, Nigerian jollof rice, or Caribbean fritters. And they're all eaten with a lot of biscuits, cornbread, fritters, or injera, which is a type of African flatbread. The constants of this celebration is not the food, but it's the idea of sharing, community, and celebration. And so Kwanzaa is one that you'll see many African Americans, again, it's relatively new, but it has entered the mainstream. And many Black Americans or African Americans will celebrate Kwanzaa in conjunction with their celebration of their traditional Christmas that many of us are used to. Again, I want to pause and see if there's any comments or questions. Okay. The next holiday that I think it's important to talk about is Christmas. And while that is a religious holiday for many people, I think it's also important to note that many people celebrate it as a secular holiday. So this is an example of where we have a holiday that is celebrated by 2 different groups, but for 2 different reasons. And Christmas is a religious holiday that has strong secular associations, and they've sort of been interwoven in each other over time. Um, but many of the people that celebrate it from a secular standpoint do many of the same traditions and things that people that are celebrating it from a religious standpoint do, but they don't have the same religious association. And Christmas is a holiday that is celebrated around the world by Christians and non-Christians alike. So you will see people celebrating Christmas in other countries that might not come from a Christian background, culture, or faith. Some of the more common traditions that we're used to at Christmas, whether you're celebrating it from a secular standpoint or a religious standpoint, are rooted in non-Christian origins. And these include things like the Christmas tree and Christmas cards. Christmas cards were not actually part of the cultural celebration until around the 19th century. And in the original celebrations, there was often a reference to St. Nicholas, a Catholic saint who was the patron saint of children or young people. And over time, that has become or transitioned to a secularized version of Santa Claus. So for most people, the Christmas holiday is an interwoven tapestry that's influenced by their religion, by their culture, and then by their individual family traditions. And I think all of us can point to some aspect of the holiday celebrations and see the same type of thing. So I think it's important to note that even though we're celebrating the same holidays in this case, people might not be celebrating them for the same reason. And that, oh, and another, the next portion of the discussion that I want to talk about is sort of a catch-all category. And there's really not enough time to do justice to covering every other type of religion's celebrations at this time of year, because for much of the world, the winter months, as we transition from the shortest day of the year into the shortest day of the year and start seeing the days get longer, had a very significant cultural, religious, or celebratory tradition for people. And so in this particular case, what we're talking about are sort of those other religions that might be polytheistic, meaning they support or follow more than one god or religious figure, and are sometimes referred to as pagan religions. Now, this is a relatively small group in the United States, but I think it's important to recognize that they have their own traditions and celebrations as well, and they feel the same passion and reverence and support for their beliefs as those people that are in more majority religions. And so during this time of year, there are a multitude of religions that are new, renewed, or even ancient religions that celebrate this time of year, and they're polytheistic or pagan. And while there's too many to detail specific information, most have some sort of celebration that has some of the same commonalities we've seen so far. The celebration of light, warmth, and family during what is the shortest time of year. Um, and you'll sometimes see people celebrating this as happy solstice or using the term Yule, which was originally a pantheistic or polytheistic term that has also been incorporated into more majority religions. And some of the traditions that we associated with the Christian Christmas celebration or the secular Christmas celebration also had their origins with some of these polytheistic celebrations, such as the Yule log, mistletoe, decorating with greenery or the Christmas tree, candles, and gift giving. All of those are things associated with the solstice. And I would also like to point out, as we explore how different people celebrate, I do know that there are some families within our 4-H program that celebrate the solstice. They come from a religious tradition that is in this category. But I also know families that celebrate and distinguish between their celebration of religious Christmas and secular Christmas. So in my family, we celebrate sort of a combination of both. It's all kind of mixed up as we celebrate Christmas. But I know other families within the 4-H program that only celebrate it from the secular side, and that might look very similar to ours. Go, get out of here. And then there's other families that might celebrate it from the religious side. And as such, they would not maybe do a tree or do some of the things that we associate with the secular version of Christmas. Sorry about that. My son came in the room on me there. So the next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is some of the many other ways that Christians celebrate the holiday of Christmas. And so we know the basics of Christmas, but there's so many variations of it, and I'm just talking about a few of them today. Before I go into that, I just wanted to see if there were any questions or any comments at this time. All right. So I'll start with the one I think a lot of us are familiar with, and that's the Christian celebration of Christmas. And when you're celebrating it from a religious standpoint, it very much focuses on the birth of the baby Jesus to Mary and Joseph in Nazareth. And a lot of what we consider our traditional Christmas celebrations are a mix of religious and secular traditions. And like many of the things we've talked about so far, you'll see the commonalities of feasting, gifting, celebrating life and family. But for Christians, this is really a major or the major holiday as it recognized the story of the birth of Jesus Christ. And this is the core of the holiday for Christian celebrants. And it's enhanced, or the celebration is enhanced by some of the other symbols, such as Santa Claus, Christmas tree, or etc. But oftentimes you'll hear practicing Christians, when talking about how they celebrate the holiday, as remember the reason for the season and some of those things, to make sure that from their viewpoint and how they choose to celebrate and share their celebratory joy with the world around them, we know that it's focused on the religious aspect of it. Another interesting celebration or tradition that I've recently learned about is Old Christmas, which is primarily celebrated in the Appalachian region. It's somewhat of, I don't want to say a dying holiday, but it doesn't have the same prominence that it did in past centuries. But Old Christmas, and this might be very familiar to some of you, but it might be new to others, but it's a unique celebration in Appalachian culture, and it was usually celebrated on January 6th. And there's some disagreement as why it was on January 6th. It's either because that's the Epiphany, or the final day when the three kings came to see baby Jesus. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Or there was also a reform in the calendar in, I think, the 1500s, and it removed 11 days from the calendar, meaning that the celebration date of Christmas switched. So for most people of current Appalachian culture, if they celebrate Old Christmas, they usually celebrate the traditional Christmas on December 25th, and then have a different type of observance on January 6th. And it's very much focused on the idea of family, community, church, or religious services. And oftentimes, according to my research, there might be stockings with fruits, nuts, and candies. There's not really a lot of gift giving with this. One of the more common traditions for this celebration is that either the children or sometimes the patriarch of the family would read the Christmas story from the Bible. And I know I'm putting people on the spot, and that never goes well, but I'm wondering if there's anyone on the call who celebrates Old Christmas, since we have such a large Appalachian group, and if you could share any information about how you celebrate that in your family or what it means to you. And I would appreciate a brave volunteer. Okay. Well, know that there are people who celebrate it, and definitely, if you live in that region, that's something to pay attention to and think about. The next Christian variant of Christmas that we're going to talk about is what's called Santa Lucia Day. And this is primarily celebrated in Sweden. But Santa Lucia Day is on December 13th, and it's a celebration of the life and death of Saint Lucia, who lived in the 3rd century. Young girls will dress as Saint Lucia brides in white gowns and red sashes, and wear a wreath of burning candles. And here you see a picture of that. They wake their family with singing and serve their family coffee and Lucia cots, which are a type of twisted saffron bun. And you'll see an example of that braided or twisted bread that she has on her platter, and wearing the traditional outfit and head wreath with candles that is done during the Santa Lucia celebration. And that's primarily celebrated in Sweden, and you may see that in areas that have a large Swedish population or Swedish culture in the United States as well. The last two variants are holiday celebrations that I'm going to talk about are actually ones that my family celebrated, and so they have personal meaning to me as well. But the first one is St. Nicholas Day. This is primarily celebrated by Germanic Catholics, and I grew up in the Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati region, where German Catholics are one of the largest cultural groups. And in our family, we always celebrated St. Nicholas Day. And it wasn't until I started high school that I learned that other people didn't. So that was something that was somewhat unique, and I didn't realize it because of my lack of perspective and experience. Um, and when I learned that people didn't do it in high school, I felt bad for them, because for us, we always celebrated St. Nicholas Day on his feast day within the Catholic Church, which was December 6th. And in our family, we hung stockings on the fireplace, and the stockings were filled with fruit, nuts, candies, and small toys. And to be honest, when our family celebrated Christmas, we also got those same items as well. So this was just a second chance in our family to get a little more food, celebration, and toys. Other families might receive these treats in a bag or basket on their fireplace or mantle, or even in some cultures, they would fill their shoes, such as Dutch culture would do that for Christmas, or people that might marry the two traditions would put out shoes or shoe replicas that would be filled with those. So St. Nicholas Day is something that it's not everyone celebrates it, but it is something that's not uncommon, especially in the part of the country where I live, or the part of Kentucky where I live. And here you have a picture of St. Nicholas. Again, strong associations with Santa Claus imagery and the bag of gifts and so on. So a lot of overlap and sharing between those two cultural and religious traditions. Another celebration that we sort of did within our family that, again, I didn't realize wasn't as widely celebrated as I thought, is Epiphany, or Three Kings Day. And this is celebrated on January 6th, and it's at the end of the 12 days of Christmas. So in case you didn't know it, the 12 days of Christmas, the song or the celebration, starts with the day after Christmas Day and goes through January 6th. And this celebration recognizes the arrival of the three kings in the Bible story who came bearing gifts to Jesus in Nazareth. And celebrations for Epiphany are common, but they vary around the world and in different cultures. But a lot of times they include church services, parades. In many countries, people will go ice swimming in icy water at that time of year. In some other cultures, they make sweet cakes and hide a baby figurine in there, and the person who finds the piece of cake with the baby figurine, and this is similar to the king cake in Mardi Gras celebrations in Louisiana. But whoever finds the king cake is responsible for providing food for another celebration in February. And you often see the sweet cakes with the baby figurine in terms of Epiphany with Hispanic cultures. And even gift giving is sometimes done on Epiphany as opposed to Christmas in certain cultures. And this is a day that we celebrated in our family. And it wasn't really a celebration so much as a religious observance. But what I always remember from is that at our Catholic church where I grew up, on Christmas Day, the baby Jesus would be placed in the manger. The manger was empty until that time. And on this Christmas Day, when the baby Jesus was placed in the manger, the nativity statuary of the three kings was put on the opposite side of church from the manger scene. And each day, someone would be responsible for moving those three kings a little bit closer to the manger scene, so that at the end of the 12 days, the three kings arrived at the manger scene to represent the giving of gifts, frankincense, myrrh, and gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And that symbology of it. And so that was something that I always remember. And then we went to church on that day. We didn't necessarily do anything else with that. But those are just some variants. So I've included some resources here for each of the holidays we talked about, and these are just popularly available online resources. I always encourage anyone when you're learning about a holiday to try to find a celebrant of that holiday to give you their perspective, because nothing replaces personal experience in sharing your culture, your religion, or your celebration. And finally, for some wrap up, I just wanted to say that I think it's important at this time of year to recognize that even though we live in a state where probably the majority of people are celebrating the religious and or secular Christmas holiday. We do have people of such a wide variety of backgrounds that celebrate a wide variety of things. And I know this is probably a little bit of a hot discussion point, but I've always felt that using the term happy holiday is inclusive of everyone. And when you don't know someone, you say happy holidays. And then if you know them on a more personal level, you can tailor that holiday greeting to them. And so I usually use happy holidays, but if I were to go somewhere where I know they celebrate Christmas, I quickly follow that up with Merry Christmas. Another reason I think the use of happy holidays is so important is for me, and this is more of a personal standpoint, we're really not celebrating a holiday, we're celebrating a season of holidays. That includes Christmas, that includes New Year's, that includes, in my case, Epiphany and some of those. So I've always thought that terminology was inclusive and appropriate. But I hope that this has been a springboard to some discussion or thoughts about different holidays that might be celebrated. And I would love to have a few people share any cultural celebrations that they might have incorporated personally as a family tradition or maybe a family cultural tradition. And one that we've added as sort of a secular celebration in our family is this guy who's behind me right now. So I think we all know him, the elf on the shelf. And we look forward to him coming to our house every year, and that's very much part of our Christmas traditions. Anyone else like to share any of the ways that they celebrate the holidays that might be unique to them, their family, or their culture?
In addition to Christmas, I'm Catholic, and so one of our traditions is we always go to midnight mass. So they have earlier masses, but they have a huge crowd that goes to service at midnight. So our evening usually ends about 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah, a lot of, well, I only know from my background as a Catholic as well that a lot of Catholics will go to midnight mass and then also have some tradition within other types of celebrations around Christmas. As at midnight, it is said that animals could talk because it was sort of Jesus's gift to the animals for sharing their space in the manger. So you might see or have heard stories about at midnight animals talk. And that was an aspect of old Appalachian discussion that I read about as well in some of the materials I did. Thanks, Megan. Anyone else want to share?
We do the Advent calendar every Sunday starting up until Christmas. We do a biblical reading of the Christmas story and light a candle that goes along with that.
Yes, and that was one I guess I forgot because we also celebrated that, and that was part of I know the Catholic celebration that we had, and I think a lot of Christians celebrate that as well. And I don't know exactly the cultural meaning for others, but I know within the Catholic Church it was used to celebrate again not just a day but a month of celebration that led up to Christmas Day.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
It's Lena. Tori told me that I may want to vocalize since you can't see the chat, but instead of Elf on the Shelf, we actually adopted using Shepherd on a Search. It's where you have the shepherd boy is making his trek from his homeland to see the baby Jesus. And so he makes his way through the house and it's got a story that goes with it. So that was introduced to us by Mariana's babysitter 2 or 3 years ago, and that's what we adopted. So
that's great, and I think that's a great way to have a similar tradition to the Elf on the Shelf that a lot of people do, but tie it to more specifically the religious celebration of the holidays. I am able to catch up a little bit on the chat box now. Some of the things I think it was done somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I've seen some Jewish celebrants who will do the mensch on a bench. And a mensch is a Hebrew word or Yiddish word for a man. So it's sort of their take of the elf on the shelf, the mensch on a bench. A lot of people, Courtney, go ahead.
Oh, we have one. A mensch is not just a man, it's just a really good, wholesome person.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to draw from my own knowledge there, which is limited. But you might see people do the mensch on a bench or the elf on a shelf. Also, advent calendars. I know that's another way of marking down the days. In our family, sort of when I was younger, before advent calendars, we did the paper chains of advent chains, we called them. And we would string together 25 chains of construction paper, and on each one we wrote a different good deed. And we did that for many years in our family. Another very personal tradition, and we actually have a newspaper article because my family was written up when I was like 7 in the Cincinnati Post or whatever it was at the time. But for a long time in our family, we always made a birthday cake on Christmas Day because we were celebrating the birthday of Jesus. And so our family would have a birthday party as well. That was just something. And Advent calendars have really advanced over the years. They, I think, started with the Advent chains, then more traditional Advent chocolate. We've got 3 of those going in my house. And now you have Advent sock calendars, Advent cheese calendars, Advent beer, wine, or liquor calendars. There's about anything you can think of in terms of that. Bonnie Jolly brought out a really good point about the fact is, I think it's important to look at a lot of people celebrate this time of year, but they all do it a little bit differently. And we need to respect and appreciate their approach to celebrating the holidays. Megan talked a little bit about the pink and purple calendars used in the Advent wreath. And we did that in our house as well. And we constantly fought, is the 3rd week of Advent the pink candle or is it the purple candle? And we could never figure that out. And I'm sure there's a right answer, but part of our tradition was just arguing about it as a family every year, I think.
We always thought that you have, like, I think you only have one pink candle, and so we always thought that was the week before Christmas. But when we go to church, they light different ones, so we could never figure it out either.
Okay, good. Well, that's part of the Catholic tradition celebration, not knowing what you're doing when it comes to the Advent calendar. Great. So I appreciate everyone's comments. I know everyone has a busy day. Someone talked a little bit about how their dad was stationed in the Netherlands and took part in the Sinterklaas celebrations, and they decorated and put out a wooden clog. And I think, Lena, I'm going to end it on sort of Lena's comment that this is a joyous time of year for most people, but this is also a challenging time of year. There's a lot of, we have a holiday season as we go through November, December, and January. And for some people that don't have good family connections or support or have limited resources, this can be a very polarizing and upsetting time of year when they see people around them celebrating. So remember, there's always room in your life to build a bigger table and invite people to that table, whether it's by word or deed or literally by inviting people to a meal. And so open your hearts and homes to the holidays so that you can share your culture and traditions, but also celebrate and learn about the cultural traditions of others. There's room for all of us to celebrate this time of year. So thank you all very much, and I appreciate your time. I will stop sharing, and I will stop.
Hey, Mark, are you still there?
Yeah, hang on one second.